The morning after with his mistress, a Korean billionaire CEO woke to a diamond ring and a final goodbye. Dawn broke over Seoul like a blade cutting through velvet. From the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Peninsula Hotel's presidential suite, the city sprawled in muted grays and golds, a kingdom of steel and ambition that Seo Min-kyu had spent 15 years conquering. He stood there naked except for silk pajama bottoms, his reflection ghosting against the glass. A man in his late 30s with the kind of dangerous beauty that made people look twice before looking away. His body carried the story of his rise. A thin scar along his ribs from a rival's knife when he was 23, the tattoo of a black lotus hidden beneath his left shoulder blade, symbol of his true empire that existed in shadows and offshore accounts. The suite smelled of expensive cologne, champagne, and the aftermath of desire. Behind him, the California king bed lay rumpled but empty, still holding the impression of two bodies. Min-kyu's mind drifted through the previous night with Liu Wenya, the way she'd traced the characters of ancient poetry across his chest with her fingertips, the silk of her black hair spilling across white sheets, her laughter when he'd told her about the Korean congressman he'd bought for the price of his daughter's medical bills. She understood him in ways that transcended morality. She never flinched at his confessions. She was his perfect mirror, reflecting back not judgment but fascination. He turned from the window, already mentally sorting through the day's agenda. A board meeting at 10, a shipment arriving at the Busan docks at noon that customs would mysteriously overlook, dinner with investors who believed his wealth came solely from technology and real estate. The architecture of lies required constant maintenance. Then he saw it. On the nightstand, catching the morning light like a captured star, sat a diamond ring. Not a wedding band, but a solitaire, 3 carats, flawless clarity, set in platinum. The kind of ring that represented promises. Next to it, a piece of hotel stationery, folded once. Min-kyu's hand trembled as he reached for the note, a foreign sensation of dread creeping up his spine like ice water. The handwriting was Wenya's, elegant, controlled, each character perfectly formed. Min-kyu, by the time you read this, I'll be somewhere you can't follow. This ring was my grandmother's, the last thing I owned that was truly mine before I gave everything to you. I'm leaving it here because I'm reclaiming myself. Don't look for me. You won't like what you find if you do. W. The paper slipped from his fingers. In that moment, Seo Min-kyu, who had ordered the disappearance of rivals, who had built an empire on the bones of other men's failures, who had never once questioned his own invincibility, felt something he hadn't experienced since childhood, the absolute terror of losing control. The penthouse was too quiet. The absence of Wenya suddenly felt like a presence itself, a ghost haunting every corner. Min-kyu moved through the suite mechanically, searching for signs, for explanations. Her overnight bag gone. Her phone charger gone. The laptop she'd brought to review shipping manifests gone. Even the jasmine perfume she always left in the bathroom had vanished. It was as if she'd surgically removed every trace of herself, leaving only that ring and that note as evidence she'd ever existed. He checked his phone. No messages. No missed calls. He opened the encrypted messaging app they used for business communications. Her account had been deleted. Panic, unfamiliar and sharp, began to claw at his composure. Min-kyu prided himself on reading people, on staying 3 moves ahead, on controlling every variable. How had he missed this? The answer arrived like a punch to the chest. He'd never truly seen her at all. He'd seen what he wanted to see. A beautiful woman who shared his bed and his secrets, who laughed at his jokes and kept his books, who existed in the perfect liminal space between lover and accomplice. He'd never asked what she wanted. He'd never wondered if the smile she gave him cost her something every time. Outside, Seoul continued its morning rush, millions of people moving through their lives, unaware that in a hotel suite overlooking their city, a powerful man was discovering the first lesson that would ultimately destroy and remake him. You cannot own another human being, no matter how much they allow you to believe you do. Every cage, given enough time, becomes visible to the person trapped inside. And when they finally see the bars, no amount of gold plating will convince them to stay. Min-kyu sat on the edge of the bed, the diamond ring burning in his palm like a piece of stolen sun. For the first time in his adult life, he had no plan, no strategy, no next move. He had only the growing realization that somewhere in the city below, a woman he'd thought he knew was disappearing into a life he'd never be invited to witness. And the worst part, the part that made his hands shake and his breath come short, was that he deserved every moment of this dissolution. The morning had broken. And so, it seemed, had everything else. If you value the hard work behind these stories, hitting that subscribe button would mean so much to me. Also, before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's continue. 3 hours after discovering the note, Min-kyu sat in the back of his armored Mercedes, phone pressed to his ear with enough force to crack the screen. His driver knew better than to glance in the rearview mirror. The voice on the other end belonged to Park Jin-ho, head of Min-kyu's private security team. 6 former intelligence operatives who handled problems that couldn't be solved through legal channels. Sir, we've checked her apartment in Gangnam. Completely cleared out. Lease was terminated 2 weeks ago, though she was still paying rent to avoid suspicion. The import-export office downtown is locked, but our contact at the building says she hasn't been there in 5 days. Her assistant claims she gave everyone an unexpected week off. Min-kyu stared out the window at Seoul's morning traffic, seeing nothing. 2 weeks. She'd been planning this for at least 2 weeks, maybe longer. Every time she'd smiled at him, shared his bed, discussed shipping schedules and payment schedules, she'd been counting down to this moment. The betrayal tasted like copper in his mouth. Bank accounts? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. The personal accounts linked to the business are empty. She withdrew everything in cash over the past month, small amounts to avoid triggering automatic reports. The offshore accounts she managed for you are untouched, but sir. Jin-ho paused, and Min-kyu could hear the fear in that hesitation. 3 of the encrypted files she maintained have been copied. The shipping manifests, the client lists, and the payment ledgers. Everything that would interest federal prosecutors. The implications crashed over Min-kyu like a wave. Wenya didn't just leave him. She left with leverage. She left with the power to destroy everything he'd built. He closed his eyes, remembering the night 3 months ago when he'd given her access to those files, trusting her completely. He'd been lying in this exact car, heading home from a business dinner, when she'd called about a problem with a shipment from Jakarta. He'd given her the passwords without hesitation. Why would he hesitate? She was his. Except she never was. Find her, Min-kyu said, each word carved from ice. I don't care what it costs. Find her today. He ended the call and immediately dialed another number. Lee Sang-woo answered on the first ring, his attorney, a man whose moral flexibility was matched only by his legal brilliance. We have a situation, Min-kyu said without preamble. I need you to prepare for the possibility that certain business arrangements might come under scrutiny. The kind of scrutiny that involves federal warrants. The silence on the other end spoke volumes. Finally, Sang-woo's careful voice. How compromised are we talking? Completely. Another pause. Min-kyu could practically hear the lawyer's mind racing through contingencies, calculating exposure, mapping legal defenses that might hold up against documentary evidence. I'll need to know what materials might surface and who has them. Liu Wenya has them, and I don't know what she plans to do with them. The Liu Wenya who runs Wei Trading Company? Sang-woo searched for the appropriate word. Yes, Min-kyu cut him off, not wanting to hear whatever clinical term the attorney chose. Partner. Associate. Mistress. None of them captured what Wenya had been. None of them explained this hollow feeling in his chest. Min-kyu, Sang-woo said, dropping formality in a way he rarely did. If she goes to federal prosecutors with detailed records of your operations, there's a limit to what I can do. We're talking about conspiracy charges, money laundering, possibly RICO statutes if they can establish an ongoing criminal enterprise. You need to find her and contain this immediately. I'm aware, Min-kyu said coldly, ending the call. The Mercedes pulled up to Seo Enterprises headquarters, a gleaming 40-story tower of glass and steel in Gangnam's financial district. Min-kyu's legitimate empire, built on his late father's technology patents and his own ruthless business acumen. Employees in the lobby bowed as he passed, their faces reflecting the proper mixture of respect and fear. He acknowledged none of them. His mind was racing through possibilities, scenarios, contingencies. Wenya was brilliant. She'd proven that over the years by managing his most complex operations without ever making a mistake. But brilliance worked both ways. He knew how she thought, how she planned, how she moved through the world. She would need money. She'd taken cash, but not enough to disappear forever. She would need documentation, probably a new passport, a new identity. She would need help, someone to provide shelter while she arranged her escape. In his private office, Min-kyu stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seoul. Somewhere in this city of 10 million people, Wenya was breathing, thinking, planning her next move. And somewhere in this city was the person helping her. His phone buzzed with a text from Jin-ho. Found something. Security footage from Incheon Airport parking garage 3 days ago. Sending video now. Min-kyu opened the attachment. The footage was grainy but clear enough. There was Wenya, pulling a small rolling suitcase, her hair covered by a scarf, sunglasses hiding her eyes. She approached a parked SUV with tinted windows. The driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out. Min-kyu zoomed in on the image, his blood running cold. The woman was black, tall, perhaps in her 40s, with close-cropped natural hair and an air of calm authority. She embraced Wenya, not the quick hug of acquaintances, but the long, tight embrace of someone offering sanctuary. They spoke briefly, and the woman took Wenya's suitcase, placing it in the back of the SUV before both women climbed in and drove away. Min-kyu screenshotted the woman's face and sent it to Jin-ho with a single word. Identify. The response came within an hour. Min-kyu read it while sitting through a board meeting he couldn't focus on, nodding at appropriate moments while his mind was elsewhere entirely. Subject identified, Dr. Jasmine Reed, American citizen, licensed clinical psychologist specializing in trauma therapy. Runs private practice in Itaewon. No criminal record. Active in expat community. Known for volunteer work with women's shelters. Immigration records show she's been in Seoul for 6 years. Sir, there's something else. Dr. Reed's practice isn't just therapy. We found coded references on social media and in certain support group forums. She runs what's essentially an underground railroad for women trying to escape dangerous situations. Abusive partners, criminal enterprises, trafficking situations. She's helped at least a dozen women disappear in the past 3 years. Min-kyu set his phone down slowly, a strange emotion twisting through his chest. Fear. Not the adrenaline spike fear of physical danger, but something deeper and more insidious. Wenya hadn't just left him. She'd found someone who specialized in helping women escape men exactly like him. Someone who would see through every manipulation, every promise, every threat he might employ. Someone who would teach Wenya to see him clearly. The board meeting droned on around him, quarterly projections, market analyses, expansion strategies. Min-kyu had built this company into a powerhouse through sheer force of will and strategic genius. But none of that mattered now. None of his legitimate success could shield him from what Wenya could do with those files. And none of his money or power could reach her if she was under Dr. Jasmine Reed's protection. For the first time in his life, Seo Min-kyu understood what it meant to be truly afraid. Not of prison or financial ruin, though those threats loomed large. He was afraid of what he might learn about himself if he ever looked through Wenya's eyes. He was afraid that the man he'd spent years becoming was exactly the man he deserved to lose everything. After the meeting, he returned to his office and did something he hadn't done in 20 years. He pulled out a bottle of whiskey from his desk drawer and poured 3 fingers into a crystal glass. The amber liquid burned going down, but it didn't touch the cold spreading through his chest. His phone buzzed again. This time it was his business partner in the port operations, a man named Choi who asked no questions and made problems disappear. Min-kyu, we have an issue. 2 of our shipping containers were flagged at customs in Busan. They're requesting full inspections. This has never happened before. Someone tipped them off. Min-kyu closed his eyes. It was beginning. Wenya's carefully documented evidence, strategically deployed to pressure points in his empire. She wasn't just running. She was dismantling everything as she went, making sure that even if he found her, there would be nothing left to return to. Handle it, he said tersely. Pay whoever needs to be paid. It's not that simple this time. The customs director is refusing meetings. He's scared of something. Or someone. Min-kyu ended the call and stood at his window again, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, in an apartment or safe house he couldn't yet locate, Wenya was probably sitting with Dr. Reed, probably talking about him. Probably learning words for things he'd done to her that she'd never had language for before. Probably realizing that what he'd called love was actually a carefully constructed prison. The thought should have made him angry. Instead, it made him empty. He picked up his phone one more time and called Jin-ho. Get me Dr. Jasmine Reed's address. Her practice, her home, any property associated with her. And Jin-ho. We approach carefully. No threats. No intimidation. I need to talk to her. Sir, are you sure that's wise? If she's protecting Wenya. I know what she's doing, Min-kyu interrupted. That's exactly why I need to talk to her. Sometimes the fastest way to find someone is to understand why they ran. After he hung up, Min-kyu stood alone in his office as Seoul's lights began to flicker on across the city. He was beginning to learn something that no amount of power or money had taught him. The people we think we know best are often the ones we've never truly seen at all. And by the time we finally look closely enough to see them clearly, they're already gone. The diamond ring was still in his pocket. He pulled it out, watching it catch the dying light. Wenya's grandmother's ring, the last thing she'd owned that was truly hers. She'd given it up to make a point. That's how desperate she'd been to escape him. She'd sacrificed a family heirloom just to ensure he understood the finality of her choice. Min-kyu had always believed that understanding someone gave you power over them. Tonight, he was learning the far more painful truth. Sometimes understanding someone only reveals how much power you never actually had, and how much damage you caused believing you did. Tomorrow, he would find Dr. Jasmine Reed. Tomorrow, he would begin unraveling the mystery of where Wenya had gone. But tonight, alone in his tower overlooking Seoul, Seo Min-kyu held a diamond ring that didn't belong to him and wondered if he'd ever owned anything real at all, or if he'd spent his entire life clutching at shadows, convinced they were substance. Dr. Jasmine Reed's practice occupied the third floor of a modest building in Itaewon, Seoul's international district, where American barbecue joints nestled beside halal restaurants and French bistros. Min-kyu studied the entrance from his Mercedes parked across the street, noting the security camera above the door, the intercom system, the reinforced lock. Dr. Reed understood danger. She'd built her sanctuary accordingly. He'd left Jin-ho and the security team blocks away. This conversation required a different approach, not the hammer of intimidation, but something he'd rarely employed in business or personal matters, genuine vulnerability, or at least the appearance of it. Min-kyu pressed the intercom button. A moment later, a voice emerged, calm and slightly accented with Southern American warmth. Yes? Dr. Reed, my name is Seo Min-kyu. I believe you're helping someone I care about. Liu Wenya. I need to speak with you. The pause stretched long enough that he wondered if she'd simply disconnected. Then, Mr. Seo, I'm familiar with who you are, and I don't discuss my clients. You're wasting your time. 5 minutes, Min-kyu said. 5 minutes of your time, and I'll leave. I'm not here to threaten or intimidate. I just need to understand. Another pause. Then the lock buzzed, and the door clicked open. Min-kyu climbed the stairs to the third floor, where Dr. Reed waited in the doorway of her office. She was exactly as she'd appeared in the security footage. Tall, perhaps 5'10", with dark skin that caught the hallway light like polished wood, close-cropped hair with hints of gray, and eyes that seemed to see through pretense the way X-rays penetrated flesh. She wore simple clothes, dark jeans, a cream-colored blouse, no jewelry except small silver earrings. Everything about her presence suggested someone who'd learned to armor themselves in stillness. 5 minutes, she said, gesturing him inside. The office surprised him. He'd expected clinical sterility, white walls, leather couches, framed diplomas. Instead, he found warmth. Deep green walls, plants in ceramic pots, a worn sofa covered in textured fabric, bookshelves overflowing with volumes in multiple languages. One entire wall was covered in Polaroid photographs of women. Dozens of them, maybe 50 or more, each smiling at the camera. Min-kyu recognized the expression on their faces, the specific joy of people who'd survived something terrible. Dr. Reed followed his gaze. Those are my victories, she said quietly. Every woman who walked through that door carrying trauma and walked out carrying hope. Wenya's picture will join them soon. Min-kyu turned to face her. Where is she? Somewhere safe. Somewhere you'll never find her. I don't want to hurt her, Min-kyu said, and was startled to realize he meant it. I just need to talk to her. To understand why she left without even trying to. Without trying to what? Dr. Reed interrupted, her voice sharp as a scalpel. Talk to you. Explain herself? Mr. Seo, Wenya spent years explaining herself to you. Every time she laughed at your jokes when they weren't funny. Every time she rearranged her schedule around your needs. Every time she participated in business, she found morally reprehensible because refusing you wasn't an option. Women like Wenya explain themselves to men like you constantly. You just never heard her. The words hit harder than any physical blow. Min-kyu felt something crack inside his carefully maintained composure. You don't know me. I know men like you, Dr. Reed said, settling into the chair across from him. I've spent 20 years helping women escape men like you. CEOs, politicians, entertainers, criminals, it doesn't matter. The pattern is always the same. You find a woman who has something you want: beauty, talent, usefulness, or just the simple pleasure of possession. You make her believe she's special, that your attention means something. Then, gradually, you consume her. Her time becomes your time. Her space becomes your space. Her identity becomes an extension of yours. And if she's very unlucky, she starts believing that's what love looks like. Min-kyu's hands clenched into fists on his knees. I never forced Wenya to do anything. Didn't you? Dr. Reed leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. Tell me, Mr. Seo, when Wenya first started helping with your illegal operations, did she volunteer? Or did you make her believe she had no choice? When she wanted to visit her family in China last year, and you needed her here, did you respect her wishes? Or did you make her feel guilty for even asking? When she expressed discomfort with the violence in your world, did you listen? Or did you explain why she was being too sensitive? Each question was a mirror, held up to moments Min-kyu had barely noticed at the time. Wenya mentioning she missed her mother's cooking, him saying they'd visit soon, but never scheduling it. Wenya flinching when he described having a rival beaten, him kissing her forehead and saying she was too gentle for this world. Wenya asking if they could spend one weekend without discussing business, him agreeing, but then pulling out his laptop anyway because just this one thing couldn't wait. I loved her, Min-kyu said, the words sounding hollow even to his own ears. No, Dr. Reed replied with devastating gentleness. You loved what she did for you. You loved how she made you feel. You loved that she fit so perfectly into the life you designed. But love requires seeing the other person as fully human, with needs and desires separate from your own. Love requires sacrifice, compromise, growth. What you felt was possession. And possession, no matter how gilded, is still a cage. Min-kyu stood abruptly, moving to the window. Below, Itaewon streets bustled with evening life, couples holding hands, friends laughing over dinner, ordinary people living ordinary lives. He'd always felt separate from that world, elevated above it by wealth and power. Now he just felt isolated. She took files, he said quietly. Evidence that could destroy me. My business, my freedom. Everything. If she gives those to federal prosecutors, I'll spend the rest of my life in prison. And Dr. Reed's voice was maddeningly calm. And I need to know if that's her plan. I need to know if I should be preparing for consequences. Dr. Reed finished. Mr. Seo, you've spent years building an empire on other people's suffering. You've trafficked goods across borders without regard for who it hurt. You've intimidated, bribed, and likely worse to maintain your power. And your concern right now isn't the harm you've caused, but whether you'll finally be held accountable for it. Min-kyu turned to face her, something desperate and raw breaking through his usual composure. Then help me. Tell me what I need to do. I'll change. I'll be better. I'll give her anything she wants. Just tell me how to fix this. Dr. Reed stood slowly, moving to stand beside him at the window. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight of hard-earned wisdom. That's the problem, Mr. Seo. You still think this is something you can fix. You still think if you just find the right words, the right gesture, the right amount of money or power, you can make Wenya come back. You're treating her departure like a business negotiation. But this isn't about what you can give her. It's about what you already took. What did I take? Min-kyu asked, his voice breaking slightly. Her sense of self, her autonomy, her ability to exist separate from your needs. Every day she spent with you, she lost a little more of herself. And the truly insidious part? You made her complicit. You involved her in your crimes, made her dirty her hands alongside yours, so she couldn't leave without feeling like she was abandoning her own guilt. That's not love, Mr. Seo. That's abuse dressed in expensive suits and champagne. The word abuse hung in the air between them like smoke. Min-kyu wanted to reject it, to argue, to explain that he'd never hit her, never screamed at her, never explicitly threatened her. But standing in Dr. Reed's office, surrounded by photographs of women who'd escaped men like him, he finally understood. Violence didn't require fists. Control didn't require chains. The most effective prisons were the ones built from guilt, obligation, and the gradual erosion of self-worth. I don't know how to be different, he admitted, the confession tasting like ash. I know, Dr. Reed said with surprising compassion. Most men like you don't. You learned early that power equals worth, that control equals safety, that emotions are weaknesses to be exploited. Someone taught you that, probably when you were young enough that it became your foundation. And now you've built an entire life on that broken foundation, and you're surprised when everything collapses. Can people change? Min-kyu asked, genuinely uncertain of the answer. Sometimes, Dr. Reed replied carefully. But change requires more than wanting to avoid consequences. It requires confronting every ugly truth about yourself, sitting with the discomfort of realizing you've caused harm, and doing the hard work of reconstruction without any guarantee of reward. Most people aren't willing to do that. They'd rather blame the people who left them for being too sensitive, too ungrateful, too damaged to appreciate what they had. And if I'm willing? Min-kyu pressed. Dr. Reed studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then you start by letting her go. Completely. No more searching. No more trying to talk to her or explain yourself. No more treating her escape as a problem to be solved. You let her heal without your interference. And you face whatever legal consequences come from your choices. That's where change begins, in accepting that some bridges can't be uncrossed and some harm can't be undone. Min-kyu's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out to find a text from Lee Sang-woo, his attorney. Federal agents just served warrants at your office. They're seizing computers and files. Call me immediately. It was happening. Wenya had made her move. Dr. Reed saw his expression change and nodded slowly. She turned the evidence over this morning. She struggled with that decision for weeks, Not because she wanted to protect you, but because she'd been so deeply enmeshed in your operations that turning you in meant implicating herself. But ultimately, she chose freedom over comfort. She chose truth over complicity. She'll be arrested too, Min-kyu said, his voice hollow. She's already negotiating immunity in exchange for testimony, Dr. Reed replied. The prosecutors are very interested in what she can tell them about your entire operation. They've been trying to build a case against you for 3 years. Wenya gave them everything they needed in one morning. Min-kyu sank back into the chair, the full weight of his destruction settling over him like concrete. His empire, his freedom, his carefully constructed life. All of it crumbling because one woman had finally seen clearly enough to walk away. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Because you asked an honest question, Dr. Reed replied. You asked if people can change. And I'm giving you an honest answer. They can, but not without first losing everything they used to define themselves. You're about to go through a crucible, Mr. Seo. How you emerge from it, or if you emerge at all, depends entirely on whether you're willing to face what you've been running from your entire life. Which is the fact that you're afraid. Desperately, bone-deep afraid. Afraid of being seen as weak. Afraid of being abandoned. Afraid of discovering that without power and control, you're just a scared boy who never learned how to love without consuming. Everything you've built, the business empire, the criminal network, the relationships where you held all the cards, it's all been armor against that fear. But armor that heavy eventually crushes the person wearing it. Min-kyu closed his eyes, and for the first time in decades, he let himself feel it. The terror he'd been running from since his father died and left him to build the family business at 23. The panic of being thrust into a world of cutthroat competition with no room for vulnerability. The desperate need to prove himself strong, capable, invulnerable. Every ruthless decision, every moral compromise, every person he'd used and discarded, it had all been in service of never feeling weak again. And Wenya had seen through all of it. That's what terrified him most. She'd lain beside him in darkness and seen not the powerful CEO or feared criminal, but the frightened man beneath the armor. And instead of the acceptance he'd desperately wanted, she'd chosen to walk away. Your 5 minutes are up, Dr. Reed said gently. Min-kyu stood, suddenly exhausted. Will you tell her something for me? That depends on what it is. Tell her. He paused, searching for words that weren't manipulation or bargaining or one more attempt to control the narrative. Tell her I'm sorry. Not for getting caught. Not for losing her. But for never seeing her clearly enough to understand what I was taking. And tell her she was right to leave. Dr. Reed's expression softened fractionally. That's the first honest thing you've said since you walked in here. I'll tell her. As Min-kyu descended the stairs, his phone continued buzzing with increasingly frantic messages. His attorney, his business partners, his security team, all reporting the same thing. Federal agents were dismantling his empire piece by piece. By tomorrow morning, he'd likely be in custody. Everything he'd spent 15 years building would be gone. But walking out into Itaewon's evening crowds, breathing air that somehow tasted different than it had an hour ago, Seo Min-kyu felt something unexpected. Not peace, but the very beginning of it. The first recognition that the weight he'd been carrying, the constant vigilance, the endless maneuvering, the exhausting maintenance of control, had always been heavier than any prison sentence could be. People thought freedom meant having the power to do whatever you wanted. But standing on that street corner, watching ordinary people live ordinary lives, Min-kyu understood for the first time that real freedom meant being able to let go. To release your grip on things and people and outcomes. To exist without constantly armoring yourself against the world. He'd never learned that lesson. And by the time Wenya had tried to teach it to him, it was already too late. Sometimes the most valuable lessons arrive in the form of losses we can never recover. And sometimes the only path to becoming better is first accepting how much damage we've done being who we were. For days after his conversation with Dr. Reed, Min-kyu sat in a holding cell in Seoul's Metropolitan Police Agency, waiting for his attorney to arrive for what would likely be their final meeting before his arraignment. The cell was small, clean, and utterly devoid of the luxury he'd taken for granted. A metal bench, a toilet, a single barred window showing a square of gray sky. In 72 hours, he'd gone from penthouse suites to this. The arrest had been professional, almost gentle. Federal agents had appeared at his apartment at dawn with warrants, allowed him to dress, and escorted him downtown without fanfare. No perp walk for the cameras. No dramatic declarations. Just the cold machinery of justice grinding forward. His attorney, Lee Sang-woo, entered the consultation room looking like he'd aged a decade since they last spoke. He set his briefcase on the table with a heavy thud. "The prosecution has enough evidence to bury you 3 times over," he said without preamble. Wenya's testimony corroborates everything in the documents. They have shipping manifests, payment records, client communications, all of it authenticated and organized. She kept meticulous records. "Of course she did," Min-kyu said quietly. "She was brilliant at her job. The best we can hope for is a plea deal. 20 years, possibly reduced to 15 with good behavior. If we go to trial and lose, which we will, you're looking at life." Min-kyu nodded slowly, the numbers washing over him without real impact. 20 years. 15 years. Life. They were just words. What did it matter? His real life, the one he'd carefully constructed, was already over. "There's something else," Sang-woo said, his voice dropping. "Wenya has agreed to testify, but she's also being charged. Conspiracy, money laundering, accessory to multiple crimes. The prosecution offered her immunity, but she refused it." Min-kyu's head snapped up. "What?" "She refused immunity. She told prosecutors that she was complicit in your operations for 8 years, that she profited from criminal activity, and that she would only testify if she also faced consequences. She's insisting on pleading guilty to a reduced set of charges. The prosecution is baffled. They've never had a cooperating witness reject immunity before." Something twisted in Min-kyu's chest. Not quite pain, not quite pride, but a recognition of something he'd failed to see about Wenya until this moment. She wasn't just leaving him. She was leaving behind the entire life they'd built together, including the parts that implicated her. She was choosing accountability over self-preservation. How much time would she get? He asked. 3 to 5 years, possibly less in a minimum security facility. Her attorney is fighting it, arguing she was coerced, but Wenya won't let her use that defense. She keeps saying. Sang-woo consulted his notes. She keeps saying, "I had choices I didn't take. I need to answer for that." Min-kyu leaned back against the cold cell wall, closing his eyes. Even in destroying him, Wenya was teaching him something. That true freedom required facing the full weight of your choices, not engineering escape routes or leveraging others to avoid consequences. She was stronger than he'd ever been. She always had been. "There's a final matter," Sang-woo said, pulling a manila envelope from his briefcase. "This arrived at my office yesterday. It's addressed to you." Min-kyu opened the envelope with unsteady hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in Wenya's elegant script. "Min-kyu, by the time you read this, we'll both be facing the consequences of the life we built together. I want you to know I don't hate you. I probably should, but I don't. What I feel is something more complicated. Grief for who we both could have been if we'd been braver earlier. You asked me once why I stayed with you for so long, even when I knew what we were doing was wrong. The truth is, I stayed because somewhere in the darkness, I convinced myself I was protecting you. That if I left, you'd make even worse choices without someone to ground you. That's what people in toxic situations tell themselves, that our presence somehow mitigates the harm, when really, we're just becoming accomplices to it. Dr. Reed asked me a question that changed everything. She said, "If you could go back to the moment you first compromised yourself for him, knowing everything you know now, would you make the same choice?" And I realized my answer was no. Not because of what it cost me, but because by staying silent, by being complicit, I enabled harm. I helped you hurt people, move illegal goods, build an empire on suffering. My silence gave you permission. I'm not writing to ask your forgiveness. I haven't earned the right to ask for anything. I'm writing because Dr. Reed says that healing requires honesty, even when it's brutal. So here's my honesty. I loved you. And I regret almost every moment of it. Not because you weren't worth loving, but because the version of yourself you showed me was a lie we both maintained. You pretended to be invincible, and I pretended to be content with the crumbs of affection you offered between business calls. The diamond ring I left, my grandmother gave it to me the week before she died. She'd worn it for 50 years, a symbol of a marriage built on partnership and genuine respect. She told me to give it only to someone who saw me as an equal. I wore it around you for 3 years, Min-kyu. You never once asked about it. You never noticed. That's when I knew I had to leave, when I realized that to you, I was just a beautiful accessory, and my internal life was irrelevant as long as I fulfilled my functions. I hope prison gives you what it's given me these past few days in therapy. Time to sit with the person you actually are, stripped of all the armor and performance. It's terrifying. I've cried more in 4 days than I did in 8 years with you, because you taught me that emotions were weaknesses to be controlled. Dr. Reed is teaching me they're actually signals, trying to tell us when we're betraying ourselves. You asked if people can change. Yes, but only if they're willing to grieve who they've been. You're going to lose everything. Your company, your freedom, your reputation, probably your sanity at some point. But maybe, if you're brave enough to sit in that loss without running from it, you'll find something real underneath all the performance. Something worth building a different kind of life around. I won't be there to see it. By the time you read this, I'll be preparing for my own reckoning. But I wanted you to know, you didn't break me. You bent me, certainly. You taught me to accept things no one should accept. But the part of me that walked away, that was always there, just waiting for permission to exist again. Take care of yourself, Min-kyu. And this time, do it honestly. W. Min-kyu read the letter 3 times, his hands shaking harder with each pass. When he finally looked up, Sang-woo was studying him with an unreadable expression. "Are you all right?" the attorney asked. "No," Min-kyu answered honestly. "But I think I finally understand why." That night, alone in his cell, Min-kyu lay on the metal bench and allowed himself to feel the full weight of his losses. His father would have been ashamed, not of the arrest, but of the weakness of being caught. His business partners had already begun distancing themselves, releasing statements about being deceived by his criminal activities. His mother, aging in a facility in Busan, wouldn't understand any of it. He had no one. For the first time in his adult life, he was completely alone, stripped of every buffer and privilege that had insulated him from genuine human connection. And in that solitude, something unexpected happened. Without the constant noise of business calls and strategic planning and maintaining his carefully constructed image, Min-kyu began to hear a voice he'd silenced decades ago. His own, unfiltered and honest, asking questions he'd never allowed himself to consider. Who would you have become if you hadn't been so afraid? When did success become indistinguishable from harm? How many people did you step on while convincing yourself you were climbing? The questions came like waves, each one bringing memories he'd buried under ambition and rationalization. The business rival whose family restaurant he'd destroyed through predatory practices, telling himself it was just business. The young employee who'd reported ethical concerns and found himself blacklisted across the industry. The countless moments when he'd chosen power over principle, comfort over conscience. And Wenya, beautiful, brilliant Wenya, who'd tried in 100 small ways to tell him she was drowning, and he'd just handed her a prettier anchor. In the darkness of the cell, Min-kyu cried for the first time since his father's funeral. Not careful, controlled tears, but the raw, ugly sobbing of someone finally facing what they'd spent a lifetime avoiding. The truth of who they'd become, and the cost of that becoming. Dr. Reed had said change required losing everything you used to define yourself. She'd been right. Without his company, his wealth, his power, his carefully maintained image, what was left? Just a man who'd confused accumulation with worth, who'd mistaken control for love, who'd built an empire on the backs of others and called it success. But somewhere in that realization, beneath the layers of shame and regret, Min-kyu felt something stirring. Not hope exactly, but the bare possibility of it. If he'd been wrong about everything, then maybe he could learn to be right. If he'd spent 15 years building the wrong kind of life, then maybe the next 15 could be dedicated to something different. Maybe prison wouldn't just be punishment. Maybe it could be the monastery he'd never known he needed, a forced retreat from the world's noise, a crucible that burned away everything false until only truth remained. The thought wasn't comforting, but it was something to hold on to as the walls closed in and the future narrowed to its barest essentials: truth, time, and the slim chance at transformation. 6 months later, Jasmine Reed sat in her office in Itaewon, reviewing case notes while rain drummed against the windows. Seoul's summer monsoon season had arrived, washing the streets clean every afternoon before the humidity returned. She found the rhythm soothing, destruction and renewal in endless cycle. Her phone buzzed with a text from Wenya. Visitation approved for next week. Still not sure I want to go. Jasmine typed back, your choice. No right answer. Just your answer. Wenya had been out on bail for 4 months, living in a small apartment Jasmine had helped her find, working part-time at an art gallery while awaiting sentencing. The prosecutors had eventually accepted her guilty plea to reduced charges: conspiracy and money laundering, 3 years in minimum security with possibility of early release. Her trial was scheduled for next month. The change in Wenya had been remarkable to witness. The polished, controlled woman who'd first appeared at Jasmine's practice had slowly dissolved, revealing someone softer and simultaneously stronger. A woman learning to sit with uncertainty, to feel emotions without immediately trying to fix or suppress them, to exist without performing competence every moment. Their sessions had been intense. Wenya had spent weeks circling the same question. How do I forgive myself for staying? Jasmine had learned not to rush toward easy answers. Instead, she'd asked Wenya to write letters to her younger self. The 24-year-old who'd first met Min-kyu at a business conference, the 26-year-old who'd accepted the first illegal task, the 30-year-old who'd known she should leave but didn't. What would you tell her? Jasmine had asked during one session. That she was just trying to survive, Wenya had answered, tears streaming down her face. That sometimes we make choices not because we're weak, but because we're trying to be strong in the only ways we know how. That sometimes we make choices not because we're weak, but because we're trying to be strong in the only ways we know how. That she deserved better, even when she didn't believe it. And do you believe it now? Jasmine had pressed gently. I'm learning to. That's all healing ever was. Learning to believe things about yourself that went against years of conditioning. Learning that you deserve dignity, autonomy, respect, love without conditions. The process was slow, painful, and nonlinear. Some days Wenya would text Jasmine at 2 a.m., panicking about the upcoming trial. Other days she'd send photos of her art gallery work, small celebrations of ordinary pleasures. A knock at Jasmine's office door pulled her from her thoughts. Come in. It was Min-kyu's attorney, Lee Sang-woo, looking less haggard than the last time they'd met. Dr. Reed, thank you for seeing me. Jasmine gestured to the chair. You said it was important. It's about Min-kyu, Sang-woo said, settling into his seat. He's asked me to deliver something to you. Well, through you to Wenya, if she's willing to receive it. I don't think that's appropriate right now. Wenya is focused on her own healing and legal situation. Contact from Min-kyu, even indirectly, could be harmful. I understand, Sang-woo said. But this isn't a letter asking for forgiveness or trying to manipulate. It's different. He's been in a prison therapy program, working with a psychologist. He asked me to share his journals with you first, to determine whether they'd be harmful for Wenya to see. He said to trust your professional judgment. Jasmine frowned. His journals? Sang-woo pulled a thick manila envelope from his briefcase. 6 months of writings. His therapist requires daily reflections as part of the program. Min-kyu wants Wenya to see them, but only if you think it won't damage her recovery. Jasmine took the envelope reluctantly. Why? What's his goal here? According to him, no goal. He says. Sang-woo consulted his phone, reading from a message. Tell Dr. Reed I'm not asking for anything. Not forgiveness, not contact, not even acknowledgement. I just want Wenya to see that I finally heard what she's been trying to tell me for years. She deserves to know her words mattered. After Sang-woo left, Jasmine sat alone with the envelope, debating whether to open it. She'd seen this pattern before. Abusers who claimed transformation, who wrote eloquent apologies, who used therapy language to manipulate their way back into victims' lives. Her instinct was to protect Wenya from any further interaction with Min-kyu. But something about the way Sang-woo had delivered the message gave her pause. The lack of urgency. The explicit permission to discard it unread. The absence of demands or timelines. She opened the envelope. The journals were handwritten in Korean, which Jasmine could read haltingly after 6 years in Seoul. She began with the first entry, dated the week after Min-kyu's arrest. Dr. Choi says I need to write every day, even when I don't want to. Especially when I don't want to. She says avoidance is my primary defense mechanism, that I've spent my life running from difficult emotions by staying busy, making deals, solving problems. So here's my first honest entry. I'm terrified. Not of prison. Of myself. I've been thinking about a moment from 3 years ago. Wenya and I were at a restaurant, somewhere expensive in Gangnam. Her mother had died that week. I'd forgotten, too focused on a merger. Wenya sat across from me, not eating, and I asked what was wrong. She said, "My mother died, Min-kyu. I told you yesterday." I remember feeling annoyed. Annoyed that she wasn't over it yet. Annoyed that her grief was inconveniencing the dinner I'd planned. I said something about how death was natural, how her mother had lived a full life, how Wenya should focus on being strong. She just nodded and excused herself to the bathroom. When she came back, she was smiling again, asking about my day. I thought I'd helped her. I thought I'd given her perspective, helped her move past unnecessary emotion. Now I understand. I taught her that her feelings were less important than my comfort. I trained her to swallow her grief, so I wouldn't have to sit with my own fear of loss. Dr. Choi asked me when I last cried. I told her my father's funeral, 20 years ago. She asked why. I said because I learned early that emotions were weaknesses that people would exploit. She said, "Who taught you that?" My father. My father, who never hugged me after age 6. Who called me soft when I cried about bullies. Who told me business was war and war required soldiers, not sensitive boys who let feelings cloud judgment. I spent my entire life trying to prove I wasn't soft. And I destroyed every genuine connection I could have had because of it. Jasmine read through months of entries, watching Min-kyu's psychological evolution in real time. Early entries were defensive, intellectualizing pain, trying to solve his emotions like business problems. But gradually something shifted. He began writing about specific moments, times he'd hurt Wenya, dismissed her, used her emotional labor without recognition. One entry, 3 months in, made Jasmine pause. Dr. Choi introduced me to another inmate today, Lee Dae-young. He's serving time for domestic violence. During group therapy, he talked about hitting his wife, and I felt disgusted. I told Dr. Choi afterward, I'm not like him. I never hit Wenya. I never even threatened violence. Dr. Choi asked, did you ever use your power to make her feel she couldn't leave? I said no. But then I thought about it. Really thought about it. There was the time Wenya said she wanted to visit family in China for her cousin's wedding. I didn't forbid it. I just mentioned casually that we had a major shipment arriving that week, and I'd need her expertise. I made it sound like a request. But we both knew what would happen if she left anyway. The disappointment, the subtle punishment of my withdrawal, the implication that she'd chosen something frivolous over my needs. She stayed. And I felt satisfied, like I'd won something. That's control. That's manipulation. The fact that I never raised my voice or made explicit threats doesn't make it less abusive. It makes it more insidious, because she couldn't even name what was happening. Neither could I. I've been reading about coercive control, about how domestic violence doesn't require physical harm, about how the most effective abuse is the kind that makes the victim doubt their own perceptions. I did that. For 8 years, I did that to someone I claimed to love. The latest entry was dated 2 days ago. I received my sentence today. 23 years, reduced from life because of my cooperation in other cases. Sang-woo says with good behavior, I might be out in 18. I'm 42. If I serve the full sentence, I'll be 65 when I'm released. If I'm released early, I'll be 60. Either way, my father's empire is gone. My name is synonymous with corruption. Everything I spent my adult life building is ashes. And I feel relieved. It's the strangest thing. When the judge read the sentence, I expected panic. Rage. The desperate feeling that I needed to fight, to appeal, to find some angle to reduce the time. Instead, I felt this enormous sense of relief, like a weight lifting that I hadn't realized I was carrying. Dr. Choi says that's what happens when you finally stop running. You realize how exhausting the running was. I've been thinking about what I'll do with 18 years. That's longer than I spent building my empire. Long enough to read every book I never had time for. Long enough to learn things that have nothing to do with profit or power. Long enough, maybe, to figure out who I might have been if I hadn't been so afraid. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want to use this time to become someone who at least understands what he took from people. Someone who, if given another chance someday, would make different choices. Wenya probably won't read this. Dr. Reed will probably throw these journals away, and she should. But on the off chance she does read them, I finally understand what you tried to tell me. You weren't too sensitive. You weren't too emotional. You weren't asking for too much. You were asking for the bare minimum, to be seen as human. I'm sorry I couldn't give you that when it mattered. I'm sorry you had to lose years of your life teaching me lessons I should have learned at 20. I hope you're healing. I hope you found people who see you clearly and love what they see. I hope someday the memory of me is just a small, distant thing. Not painful, just there. Proof that you survived something difficult and came out stronger. Take care of yourself, W. You always deserved better than what I had to offer. Jasmine set down the journals, feeling emotionally wrung out. She'd read thousands of pages of apologies over her career, some genuine, most manipulative, all complicated. These fell somewhere in the middle, genuine self-awareness, but still tinged with the self-centeredness of someone learning to think beyond themselves for the first time. The question wasn't whether Min-kyu was truly changing. People could change, but transformation was never complete or linear. The question was whether exposing Wenya to his process would help or harm her own healing. She texted Wenya, "Can you come in tomorrow? Something you should see. Won't force you, but I think it might be helpful." The response came quickly. "Is it from him?" "Yes." A longer pause. Then okay. "Tomorrow at 3. The next afternoon, Jasmine watched Wenya read through the journals in silence, her face cycling through emotions, anger, sadness, recognition, grief. When she finally set them down, she sat quietly for several minutes. "What are you feeling?" Jasmine asked gently. "Too much," Wenya admitted. "I'm angry that it took losing everything for him to see me. I'm sad that he's capable of this much self-awareness, but couldn't access it when we were together. She paused, searching for words. "I'm relieved. That sounds terrible, but I'm relieved. For months, I've been carrying this question. Did I imagine it? Was I too sensitive, like he always implied? Reading this, seeing him finally name what he did, it validates something I've been trying to believe. That you weren't crazy? That I wasn't wrong to leave." Wenya's eyes filled with tears. "Every time I doubted myself, every time I thought maybe I should have tried harder or communicated better, this is proof that the problem wasn't me. The problem was that he chose power over partnership every single time. Does it change how you feel about him?" Wenya considered the question seriously. "It makes me sad for both of us. We could have been good together if he'd been capable of vulnerability back then. But he wasn't. And I stayed anyway, thinking my love could change him. That's the part I'm still working to forgive. Not him, but myself for staying so long. Do you want to respond to him?" Jasmine asked. "No," Wenya said decisively. "This isn't about him and me anymore. It's about him and himself. His growth isn't my responsibility. My growth is." She touched the journals gently, almost tenderly. "But I'm glad he's trying. Not for my sake. For his. Everyone deserves the chance to become better than they've been. I just don't need to witness it." Jasmine felt pride bloom in her chest. This was what healing looked like. The ability to hold compassion for someone who hurt you without sacrificing your own boundaries. To acknowledge growth in others without centering their redemption in your own story. "What do you want to do with the journals?" she asked. Wenya stood, moving to the window where rain still drummed against the glass. "Keep them. Maybe someday I'll want to read them again. Maybe not. But I don't need to carry them with me. There is truth, his process. Mine is separate now." She turned to face Jasmine, and her expression held something new. Not the polished competence she'd worn like armor, nor the raw vulnerability of early healing, but something more integrated. Strength that acknowledged wounds. Peace that coexisted with pain. The complex beauty of someone becoming whole precisely by accepting their own fractures. "I'm ready," Wenya said. "For what?" "For whatever comes next. The trial. Prison. Everything after. I'm ready to face it as myself, not as someone's mistress or accomplice or victim. Just as Wenya. That's enough. Jasmine smiled, feeling the particular satisfaction that came from watching someone cross an invisible threshold toward wholeness. Yes, she agreed. That's more than enough. That's everything. After Wenya left, Jasmine stood alone in her office, looking at the wall of Polaroid photographs. All those women who'd walked through fear toward freedom. She pulled out a camera and snapped a picture of Wenya as she exited the building, umbrella open against the rain, walking with purpose toward whatever future awaited her. When the photo developed, Jasmine pinned it to the wall alongside the others. Another victory. Another woman reclaimed. Outside, Seoul's monsoon continued its work, washing away the old, making space for new growth. And somewhere across the city, in a prison cell where rain drummed against narrow windows, a man sat alone with his journals, learning slowly what it meant to be human without armor. The work of becoming was never finished. But at least now, for both of them, it had finally begun. The minimum security facility where Wenya served her sentence released her on a Tuesday morning in autumn. Jasmine waited outside the gates, having closed her practice for the day to be present for this moment. When Wenya emerged carrying a single bag, her hair longer than before, her face holding a serenity that prison rarely granted anyone, Jasmine felt tears prick her eyes. They didn't speak until they were in Jasmine's car, driving through Seoul's morning traffic toward the small apartment Jasmine had helped arrange for Wenya's re-entry. "How do you feel?" Jasmine finally asked. "Free," Wenya said simply. "Really free. Not just out of prison. Free from the person I was before." They spent the day together, buying groceries, setting up the apartment, talking about Wenya's plans. She'd been accepted into a master's program in art history at Seoul National University. Her prison time had been spent reading, studying, preparing for a future that didn't involve looking over her shoulder or managing someone else's darkness. "Have you heard from Min-kyu?" Jasmine asked carefully as they assembled a bookshelf. "No, and I don't need to." Wenya smiled slightly. "But Sang-woo mentioned he's teaching other inmates to read and write. Apparently he's halfway through a literature degree through correspondence courses. Changed his name, refuses visitors from his old life. He's trying to become someone new. How does that make you feel?" "Glad for him, and completely separate from him. His redemption isn't mine to witness or validate. We're both just people trying to be better than we were." She paused, looking around the small apartment. Nothing like the luxury she'd once shared with Min-kyu, but entirely hers. "I don't hate him anymore. I don't love him either. He's just someone I used to know, in a life I used to live." That evening, after Jasmine left, Wenya stood alone in her new space. She thought about the woman who'd left a diamond ring on a hotel nightstand 3 years ago. Desperate, scared, but finally brave enough to choose herself. That woman had walked through fire and emerged not unscathed, but transformed. On her bookshelf, she placed a small object, the diamond ring. Sang-woo had returned it months ago, found among Min-kyu's confiscated possessions. Min-kyu had kept it all this time, never selling it, never discarding it. Just holding on to it like a reminder of what he'd lost. Wenya had accepted it back not as a symbol of their relationship, but as a symbol of her grandmother's strength. The strength to choose dignity over comfort, truth over convenience, freedom over gilded cages. She touched the ring gently, then moved to her window. Seoul sprawled below, full of lights and lives and possibilities. Somewhere in that city, Min-kyu sat in a cell, learning slowly what she'd learned the hard way. That the only person you could truly control was yourself, and that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was let go of everything you thought defined you and start again. The work of healing was never finished. But at least now, they were both finally doing it honestly. Not for each other, not for redemption or forgiveness, but for the simple, profound reason that they'd finally learned what it meant to be free. And that, Wenya thought as rain began to fall again outside her window, washing Seoul clean for another night was enough.